Some people enter your life not to love you, but to make you doubt yourself. They don't make you cry. They simply silence you in a way that wounds. There's no argument, no insult, just a gradual erosion of trust in your own instincts, your memory, and your emotions. And the most terrifying part is this. You don't realize you're being manipulated until the face in the mirror no longer feels like your own. Stoic philosophy does not teach us to distrust others. It teaches us to listen to ourselves. In a world where dangerous people do not shout but whisper, do not threaten but seduce, inner awareness is your strongest shield. No one can infiltrate your mind if you guard your clarity. No one can control your emotions if you learn to observe rather than react. Strength is not in avoiding pain, but in walking through it with consciousness. And here are 7 silent but cutting signs you must recognize before it's too late. 1. Seductive like a mirror. Not everyone who breaks you comes into your life with cruelty. Some arrive with a gentle gaze, with questions that make you feel rarely heard, and with a strange sense of familiarity. You've just met them, yet they seem to know you as if they've known you forever. They smile when you smile, tilt their head when you feel low, and recall the exact name of the song you once casually mentioned. At first, you think it's synchronicity, luck, fate. But sometimes, what appears to be a deep connection is simply a reflection, skillfully orchestrated, a mirror with intent. When someone makes you feel special too quickly, too perfectly, pause. Because not everyone who stirs your emotions deserves a place in your mind. A manipulator doesn't conquer you with truth. They conquer you with the version of themselves you most want to see. They don't tell you who they are. They captivate you by repeating your own voice in their words. And in doing so, you fall into a false sense of safety, a place that feels like being understood, but is actually a mental script meant to control. A dangerous person doesn't approach through confrontation. They come through compatibility, not accidental compatibility, but one carefully crafted. They hear your stories about childhood and subtly share a similar tale. They hear your interests and suddenly claim the same passions. If you once said you loved a little-known book, you'll be shocked when they quote it word for word on your next meeting. They don't study you to connect. They analyze you to gain trust. And once you begin to trust, they no longer need to try. Because by then, you've already started syncing your emotions to their rhythm. You stop questioning. You start thinking maybe this is truly a kind person, someone different, someone you shouldn't lose. And that thought becomes the first weakness they exploit. A sincere person never makes you feel indebted for their attention, but a manipulator will leave an echo in every word, making you feel compelled to respond, to open up, to trust even when something in your gut feels unclear. Stoicism teaches, not everything that feels good is good, and not everything good feels good. Don't let the comfort of shared feelings blur your awareness. A true connection is built over time, through repeated actions, through trials and conflict. What arrives too quickly, too smoothly, too perfectly is rarely sincerity. It's rehearsal. One of the clearest signs is when you say no. When you don't comply, don't please, don't go along. A genuine person will accept and respect that boundary. But for a manipulator, that's when the mask begins to crack. They may not change instantly, but you'll notice subtle coldness, impatience in the eyes, a sudden loss of enthusiasm in the voice. And then you start wondering, did I do something wrong? Am I being too sensitive? Am I ruining something good? But the truth is, you haven't ruined anything. You've simply touched the carefully crafted shell designed to lure you as long as you remained obedient. Stoicism doesn't oppose emotion. It opposes deception. It doesn't forbid trust. It requires observation. In every relationship, ask yourself, am I being loved or being programmed to depend? Do I feel safe or am I being lulled by comforting words? Will they remain kind if I stop agreeing? A manipulator will make you believe that similarity is proof of love. But love isn't imitation, it's the acceptance of difference. When someone mirrors you so perfectly that there's nothing left to discover, be cautious. You may not be facing a person but a mirror with an agenda. A mirror reflecting your best self, not to honor it, but to bait your longing to be loved. Remember this: a sincere person never needs to be perfect to be loved by you. But a manipulator will try to become everything you ever wanted until you no longer want to be yourself. Don't let the spotlight of attention blind your reason, because if you close your eyes too long, you might wake up in a world that no longer feels like your own. That's the first sign seductive like a mirror. Let your mind become the light that reflects truth not once, but in every moment of connection. Because the one who observes cannot be easily controlled, and the one who knows himself will always hold the final choice. 2 lies, not for gain, but for control. Imagine someone sitting across from you, looking straight into your eyes, and insisting that the shirt you're wearing is red when clearly it's blue. At first, you think they're joking or testing you, but then they say it again, calmly, firmly, without a hint of hesitation. And even though your reason screams they're wrong, a shadow of doubt creeps into your mind, not because they're right, but because they're so certain. This is no ordinary lie. It's an attack on reality. Dangerous manipulators don't merely twist the truth. They rebuild it detail by detail until you can no longer tell what's real and what's not. And the scariest part is, they don't do it to avoid blame. They do it to control you from your emotions, your thoughts, to the way you remember the past. An ordinary lie has a clear motive: to avoid consequence, to hide a mistake, to protect an image. But for the manipulator, lying serves no practical need. Sometimes they distort the truth just to test how much you can endure. They create alternate versions of the same story, not to convince you, but to make you doubt yourself. When you start asking, did I misremember? Am I being too sensitive? Why is everything so confusing? They've already gained control, not through force, but through internal doubt. Stoic wisdom warns, we are not disturbed by events, but by how we view them. But what if that view is stolen? What if those around you deliberately shift your lens, warp your memory, and leave you confused about your own experience? Then peace is no longer the fruit of meditation, it's a silent war waged within your mind. There's a subtle tactic called gaslighting where the manipulator denies what you clearly remember. They say, I never said that, even though you recall every word. They say, you're overreacting, when you're simply being reasonable. They insist, that never happened, even though you know it did. And when this happens long enough, with enough finesse, your mind begins to fracture. Not because you are weak, but because you've been lured into a simulated world, where you no longer trust your feelings, your memories, or even your own logic. They don't just manipulate the truth between you and them, they restructure the truth between you and everyone else. One day you notice your best friend pulling away. They say you've said something offensive, but you know you didn't. And the manipulator stands in the middle playing the innocent, the peacemaker. In reality, they've planted seeds of doubt between you and others until only they remain. It's a familiar pattern. Isolation rewriting reality, then control. When your friends stop calling, when your family starts doubting you, when the world feels upside down and only they seem to understand, you pause. That's not connection, that's engineered isolation through deliberate distortion. These people are masters of using truth as seasoning. They don't fabricate everything. They add a sliver of truth to disguise a larger lie. They recount an event but change the order. They quote you word for word, but omit the context. They present evidence but only the part that fits their script. What makes them dangerous is this: the deceit is never obvious. It's like water slowly warming until you realize you've been boiled in your own story. And when you confront them with proof, logic, facts, they don't deny. They deflect. They ask, "Why are you so sensitive? Why do you remember everything? Why can't you just let things go?" And suddenly, they make you believe that fighting for the truth is a sign of mental instability. You begin to feel guilty for not forgetting. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone proves me wrong, I will gladly change, for what I seek is truth." But these people aren't seeking truth. They seek a controlled reality, where right and wrong are blurred, where their words become law, and where you're too exhausted to resist because you've been drained. You know you're in danger when you begin apologizing for things you didn't do. When you lie in bed, replaying every conversation, every detail, every denial. That's not love. That's psychological warfare, and you are the only warrior who doesn't know you're at war. And in all these silent battles, the one thing you must preserve is not your trust in them, but your loyalty to yourself. If something inside you says it's not right, it doesn't need evidence to be heard. Intuition is the wisdom of the soul. Never let anyone convince you to throw it away. 3. Emotionless like a desert. There are moments in life when you sob in the dark over something seemingly small, and all you need is a quiet glance, a gentle hand on your shoulder to know you're not alone. But there are also people who sit right next to you, listen to every broken word, and respond only with a hollow nod, a dull, "Yeah, I understand," when you know they understand nothing, not because they're unintelligent, but because there is no space inside them for real emotion. It is an absence that cannot be measured, cannot be named, cannot be described in ordinary language. It's not mere indifference, but an inner void so complete that you feel you're speaking to a flawless replica of a human being, except the soul has been removed. They can mimic empathy, recall how others offer comfort, say the right thing at the right time, but it's all pre-programmed script. And you feel it, not through logic, but through a subtle, persistent intuition. You see their eyes never dim with your sorrow. You see their hands never tremble when you share childhood nightmares. You realize that in moments when your emotions overflow, their response is not sympathy, it is analysis. Stoicism teaches that a rational person is not ruled by emotion, but does not ignore it either. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What harms the part, harms the whole." Meaning, the pain of someone else, if you are a part of their life, is also yours to bear. But with those who lack emotional depth, they never hurt when you do. They observe, they take note, and worse, they may use those vulnerable moments as weapons later. When you say you've been abandoned, they don't ache. They file it away like useful data. So later, when you panic over their sudden silence, they say, "Why are you overreacting just because I didn't text for a day? Are you letting the past control you?" It sounds like advice, but in truth, it's a twist of the knife in a wound still healing, done not out of ignorance, but with intent. Here's what you must understand. People can be tactless, a little cold, or awkward in conversation, but the ones we're speaking of are not clumsy. They are precise observers. They see every subtle shift in your face, know exactly when you're hurting, holding back, or craving to be held. But they do nothing. Not because they don't know, but because they lack the inner impulse to respond with genuine feeling. That's why, around them, you always feel a strange loneliness. even as they hold your hand, even as they speak the sweetest words. Because real emotion cannot be faked forever. At some point, the act becomes hollow, and you realize you're not in love with a human being, but with a version created to win you. Seneca once said, "No one falls apart from misfortune unless they were first deceived by hope." And in this case, hope sounds like they'll change. They just haven't learned how to love. They just need more time. But one cannot give what they do not possess. You cannot teach someone to feel pain for another's suffering. You cannot teach someone to feel life while standing at a funeral. You cannot demand genuine emotion from someone who has never truly touched their own. The danger lies not in their lack of feeling, but in their fluency with expression that lacks soul. They know when to cry on cue. They know how to shed tears over an old, sad story. They know how to look at you the right way during a quiet sunset. But you can feel it is a performance so perfect, it's terrifying. You know why? Because after those moments pass, when life returns to normal, you still feel empty. They don't follow up. They don't repeat their concern. They don't keep the emotional rhythm. They vanish right when you need them most. And when you ask why, they stare at you with innocent eyes and say, "Are you expecting too much from me?" If you are in a relationship where you feel alone even when you're not, where your pain is always explained away with logic, where the tenderness you receive always comes with an expiration date, stay sharp. You're not weak. You're waking up to a cold truth that some people live in the human world but never truly belong to it. 4. No remorse, only blame. There's a kind of hurt that doesn't come from fists or insults. It comes when you're in pain, and the one who caused it looks at you with empty eyes. Not explosive cruelty, but absolute coldness in the face of someone else's suffering. You're hurt. They don't react. You cry. They remain silent. And when you ask, "Do you even know how much this hurts me?" they shrug. You're making too big a deal out of this. A disturbed mind isn't always brutal in action. Sometimes the deepest cruelty lies in the total absence of remorse. They may wound you through words, silence, or sudden withdrawal. But they never stop to ask, "What have I done?" To them, your pain carries no weight, no warning bell, no guilt, only the smooth, impenetrable wall of calculated detachment. A person with a conscience will sometimes wrestle with regret. They'll rethink an argument, send an apology, quietly check if the one they care about is okay. But a manipulator is different. They don't seek resolution. They wait to see how long you'll endure. They don't feel discomfort over making you sad. They only feel bothered if your reaction is too strong. Stoic philosophy never taught us to suffer from others' mistakes. Epictetus once said, "Others may act wrongly, but do not let their wrong define who you are." But what happens when the same wrong is repeated over and over, not from ignorance, but from indifference? They don't apologize, or if they do, it's hollow. "I'm sorry if you feel hurt." It sounds comforting, but it's sugar-coated blame shifting. Because what they're really saying is, "I'm not wrong. Your emotions are the problem." And so you begin the spiral. Am I too sensitive? Am I expecting too much? Am I the one who needs to change? But you forget this. Truly kind people don't make you constantly adjust your definition of kindness. Worse still, when you finally speak up, they don't retreat. They reverse the game. They make you the villain. "You're manipulating me. You always make me feel guilty." When in truth, you're just trying to salvage what's left of yourself after being neglected. And then you apologize. Not because you're wrong, but because you've been conditioned to believe your emotions are harmful. Regret is a sign of moral awareness. It doesn't make you weak. It proves you're still human. A person who can bow their head to someone else's pain still carries a working inner compass. But a manipulator lives without such a guide. They step over the wounds they cause like puddles, avoiding wet shoes, never looking back. You can forgive someone who feels remorse, but you cannot hold on to someone who sees all hurt as your fault. Because the more patient you are, the colder they become. The more understanding you are, the further they push the line. And the more you try to explain, the more they use your clarity to dodge accountability. Seneca once emphasized, "We are only crushed by misfortune if we were once seduced by illusion." And the illusion here is the belief that someone who never looks back will one day choose to change. But they won't, because they don't see anything to change. They don't see fault, only the nuisance of your emotions. If you're in a relationship where every question leads to you apologizing, where every wound you suffer gets reduced to your issue, where harm keeps happening without reflection, remember, you're not loving a person. You're trying to heal barren land where remorse will never grow. 5. Living off your emotions and finances. Not everyone who drains you comes with raised voices. Some only smile gently and say, "I need you right now." And you nod. The first time, it's a small amount of money. The next, a few weeks of crashing at your place because they're in between homes. Then it's an extra credit card for convenience. And before you know it, you're covering the entire cost of both your lives, and they're still saying sweetly, "I'm just trying to build our future." A parasitic person never enters your life through blatant greed. They come with kind words, with an air of vulnerability, with stories that stir your sympathy. They don't snatch. They let you open your heart, offer freely, and feel noble for doing so. That is the most subtle form of exploitation, when dependence is disguised as love, sacrifice, and responsibility. And they don't just feed off your finances. They survive on your emotions, your time, your kindness. They don't create value of their own. They consume what you have, then redefine it as if it's their entitlement. When your schedule begins to orbit around their needs, when your money becomes a shared budget you no longer control, when your private space is slowly invaded by their constant presence, you may no longer be living for yourself. Stoic philosophy once reminded us, not everyone who needs you deserves to have you. Kindness should not be exploited. Compassion should not be an open door to those with no intention of standing on their own feet. But manipulators of this kind are skilled at making you believe. If you stop helping, you are cold, selfish, heartless. They bend the meaning of goodness and leave you feeling guilty simply for wanting a fair life. They often appear when you're at your weakest, just after a breakup, a job change, or some personal crisis. When you're not yet steady, they offer to share the load. They wipe your tears with one hand and reach into your wallet with the other, and you don't see it because you just needed someone there. But when you recover, you realize they never helped you rise. They climbed onto your shoulders and let you carry both of you. At first, everything is justified by affection. I don't mind sacrificing for the one I love. Then you're buying your own birthday gift, paying for the vacation, fronting the car loan. They don't ask, they just stay silent long enough for you to offer. And every time you say yes, you lose a bit more freedom, because you start to realize if you say no, the affection will be withdrawn too. And the parasitism doesn't end with money. They begin to anchor their existence in your emotional bandwidth. They call for hours just to unload their worries. They need you to listen, advise, fix, and be their emotional pillow during every crisis. But when you need a shoulder, a call, a true presence, they disappear, get busy, grow tired, or even accuse you of being too dependent. Stoicism doesn't reject kindness, but Stoicism rejects the loss of the self within that kindness. Epictetus once wrote, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." A parasitic person never knows how to want less. They are endlessly hungry for emotion, for money, for attention, and they always seek out the one most willing to endure. Not because they need, but because they know you struggle to say no. Look closely. Are you exhausted yet still feel guilty when you refuse to help? Are you covering more than your share, but afraid speaking up will ruin the relationship? Are you slowly losing autonomy over your space, your time, and your finances? If so, then perhaps you're not loving a person, but propping up a system of exploitation cloaked in the label of us. 6. No self-control, no accountability. Some people live like a sudden storm. They arrive with impulsive energy, blazing words, reckless actions, then vanish in the rubble they created. The issue isn't the chaos itself, but their complete refusal to take responsibility for the damage. They never return to repair. They just move on, leaving others standing in the ashes, trying to understand what just happened. Have you ever met someone like that? They change plans at the last second. They quit jobs without notice. They dive into relationships and exit just as fast, without a second thought. They live as if the world is a racetrack and the rules don't apply to them. And when everything falls apart, they say, "I'm just being true to myself." But the truth is, being true to yourself does not mean living without responsibility. They'll tell you dramatic stories. The former boss was controlling, the ex didn't appreciate them, the friends betrayed them, the family never understood. Every chapter in their life is a tragedy in which they're always the victim. And you, if you're not careful, will become the next character in that script. The one left picking up the pieces after a chain of impulsive decisions and relentless blame. Stoic philosophy never encourages avoidance. On the contrary, it demands that we confront ourselves directly. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't waste time debating what a good person is. Be one." But people who lack control and always blame others don't argue to understand. They argue to escape responsibility and flip the logic against you. They don't admit fault. They just say, "Everything happened because you pushed me too far." They don't apologize. They just say, "If only you hadn't made me so angry." In their mind, they're the victim of expectations, pressure, misunderstanding, never the source of pain. What's dangerous is not just the lack of control, but how skilled they are at justifying it. They don't learn to self-regulate. They learn to retell every story in a way that leaves them blameless. And if you're not grounded, you'll find yourself constantly overcompensating, constantly explaining, constantly tiptoeing just to avoid triggering their next explosion. You start walking softly, speaking gently, telling yourself, "He's just tired today. It's not a big deal. Don't stir things up." But you don't realize you're living in a danger zone created by someone else, and now you've taken on the burden of managing it for them. The uncontrolled often hide behind a mask of personality. They're attractive because they keep it real, take risks, aren't like anyone else. But difference should never be used as a shield for destruction. Because over time you'll learn, people who live without principles don't just wreck their own lives, they destabilize yours too. They don't get back up after failure. They pivot. They don't apologize after causing harm. They ignore it. And every time the past comes back up, they say, "I've moved on. Why can't you?" But those who truly move on correct their mistakes. These people, they just erase the evidence. And in their lack of self-control, what do you see? You see yourself shrinking your dreams so they don't feel inferior. You find yourself avoiding long-term plans because they react as if you're trapping them. You become the only adult in the relationship while they remain the child, endlessly indulged. Epictetus once said, "No one is truly free who is not master of themselves." And if they cannot master themselves, you will never be free beside them. You'll always be adjusting, yielding, guessing, calming, and you'll call it love. But in truth, it's just a reversed form of dependence. If your relationship feels like a cycle of surprise, hurt, forgiveness, and then surprise again if you're always forced to be the adult who manages their volatility if you're straining to maintain balance while they keep throwing chaos into the mix, then perhaps you're not in love. Perhaps you're just the tightrope walker in someone else's emotional circus. 7. Creating chaos to become the center. Not everyone who comes to you is seeking love. Some come to disrupt everything you once called peace. They don't destroy from the start. They don't need to yell, don't need to break anything. They only need to plant a question, blow in a whisper of doubt, and you begin to second-guess yourself. And then, as if an invisible hand has gripped the center of your life, it turns everything in the direction they want. Before you even realize it, they become the only point of stillness in the chaos they themselves created. Some people live as if peace is a threat. They can't stand silence. They don't know how to accept stability. To them, if a relationship has no tension, it must be dead. If a day passes without conflict, maybe they are no longer the center. So they don't wait for disorder, they manufacture it. At first, you don't notice. You simply think, they're just a bit moody, or that's just their personality. But over time, a pattern becomes clear. Every time you begin to feel at ease, they do something to make you uneasy. Every time you return to a focused state, they pull you into a new spiral, an absurd argument, a groundless misunderstanding, a tense moment they themselves triggered. And then, amid the confusion, they're the first to say, "I'm just trying to help you wake up." They provoke your anger, then accuse you of being too emotional. They say something offensive, then tell you you're overreacting. They plant doubt without reason, then return as the one who soothes you. As if they light the fire, then arrive with water, so you end up thanking them for putting out the fire they set themselves. Stoic philosophy does not avoid conflict, but Stoicism teaches us never to be led by emotions others have manipulated. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone makes you angry, know that it is your own mind agreeing to be provoked." In a world of chaos, the first act of clarity is recognizing who is trying to make you lose control. The skilled manipulator uses chaos as a tool of control. They don't wait for problems, they plant them in your mind through half-true questions. "Did you see the way Lynn looked at you? Why are you hiding that? I don't even know what you're keeping from me anymore." They drop hints of suspicion like ink in water, then disappear, leaving you to drown in the unrest they created. They don't need to lie much. They only need to make you uncertain about what's real, what's emotional, what's instinct, what's reaction. And the more confused you get, the more essential they seem. They reappear as the only one who can explain everything. But the truth is, they are the only one who knows the game, because they wrote the script. In a healthy relationship, peace is the foundation. But in a manipulated one, chaos is the glue. They make you dependent by making you unable to stand without them. They wear you down, then step in as the only one still thinking clearly. But that isn't clarity. It's control, built on the strategy of distraction. Stoicism teaches that clarity comes from observation, not reaction. If you constantly find yourself having to explain, to soothe, to fix something without knowing what went wrong, if you walk away from conversations feeling exhausted, confused, and guilty, then it's not that you've lost control. It's that someone is making you believe you no longer have it. You don't need someone who pulls you into chaos just to then play the hero. You need someone who doesn't create chaos in the first place. Someone who truly loves you won't test you with meaningless turbulence. They create space for you to simply be without fear, without armor. I used to believe that those who hurt others must be full of hate, of anger, of some painful past. But I came to understand not all harm comes from hatred. Some comes from absolute emptiness, where emotion is no longer something to be felt, but something to be used. And when you love someone like that, you don't just suffer from pain, you slowly lose the ability to trust yourself. What woke me up wasn't a sudden shock, but a quiet exhaustion. The feeling of no longer recognizing who I was, standing in front of someone who once called me everything. I write this not to make you afraid of others, but to help you ask the right questions at the right time, to protect your trust in the right places, and to walk away from the right people. Peace doesn't come from holding on to the wrong person. It comes when you choose to stay loyal to the truth, even if that truth means walking alone. If you found value in these words, please like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next videos. And take this with you as you leave. You don't need to be chosen by anyone to start living like someone who deserves everything good. See you in the next video.